What is the Bible?
So the Bible is just a collection of books. When people quote the Bible, they're talking about a collection of books. Now, which books in particular? So first of all, if you ask Mormons, you're familiar with the Mormon Church? The Latter-day Saints?
No. I got some Mormon friends.
Yeah? Nice guys, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're pretty good
Yeah.
folks. No offense. I love Mormons. But their religion is nuts. They incorporate into their Bible a couple of books like the Book of Mormon, the Book of the Pearl of Great Price, Doctrine and Covenants, that were literally written about 150 years ago. But they incorporate that in the Bible. Nobody else does. That's just their little sect. There's a whole bunch of new sects that add sort of books. But from the original Bible, the ancient Bible, so the only books that are undisputed are the 24 books of Tanakh. The 24 books that Jews have always accepted as the Bible, and that Christians subsequently accepted into their Bible, and then they added on a whole bunch of new books. Now, among the different Christian denominations, there are some that have more than just what they call the New Testament. There are some Christian groups that have what they call the Apocrypha, the Pseudepigrapha. The Ethiopians have a couple of books that are from way later, just about 1,000 years ago, which is very, very recently, from the perspective of the Bible, 1,000 years ago. But most Christians have the New Testament. Some of them have the Apocrypha, some have the Pseudepigrapha. Now, all of these books in the Christian Bible were completed already by about 1,800 years ago. Some were already completed 2,200 years ago. So other than the Ethiopian Bible, possibly some small Eastern faiths, all of the biblical books were completed already 1,800 years ago, and they were all, as far as we know, they were all written by Jews. But just because a Jew wrote something doesn't mean that every Jew is going to venerate it. So most Jews, in fact, the traditional Jewish community, never accepted any of the books that deal with Jesus, and they also did not accept as officially part of the book, the divine book, the most important book, various books that we call Apocrypha or Pseudepigrapha that were written about 2,000 years ago by Jews that don't necessarily relate to Jesus, don't have to deal with Christianity, but are Jewish books that after Judaism birthed Christianity, basically Judaism birthed Christianity obviously with Jesus, which, Jesus was supposedly born 2,023 years ago, although historians will claim he was born 2,019 years ago, whatever the case might be. But it was a completely Jewish religion. In Jesus' day, it was a completely Jewish faith. And in fact, it was Judaism. It was just a kind of Judaism. And it was not in any way as distinct as it is today. But once the Jews did not accept it, the Bible, together with the Christian stuff, together with Paul's letters. Have you heard of Paul, by the way?
St. Paul? I know he's. Yeah. I've never read the New Testament.
Well, most of the New Testament is written by Paul. Now, Paul is a guy who used to be a fanatical Jew. He used to be a Jewish guy who used to go around persecuting Christians. Now, bear in mind, at that time, they weren't called Christians. They were simply Jews who thought that Jesus was this really, really important dude and that he died and he's going to come back to life. They didn't think he was God in any kind of serious way. The closest that we can approximate them to is kind of like Chabad. Now, you know Chabad, Lubavitch, from the people who aren't living in Crown Heights or in Kfar Chabad, people who aren't living in large Chabad communities. So you know those who know how to represent their beliefs to the outside world, who are the most normal, etc. But there's plenty of Chabad people for whom the Rebbe is their key into Judaism. And so too, in the early years of the first millennium, right, in Jesus' life and shortly thereafter, there were plenty of Jews who regarded Jesus as essential and a sort of messianic figure, but definitely not the way he's viewed today once Christianity became an entirely Gentile religion, once it left Judaism in total. And that's largely because of Paul. Paul is this guy, his name was Shaul of Tarshish, and Shaul was a rabbi or rabbinic character. It's not really clear if he was a rabbi, but he was a religious Jew who was a fanatical anti-Christian fellow. And again, at that point, all the Christians were Jewish, and his only issue with them was some sort of vague and like many fanatics, he switched sides and became a fanatic to the other side. And he said that it's no longer a Jewish faith, but it's a faith for the whole world. And because of him, it became a non-Jewish religion, also because of Bar Kokhba. Bar Kokhba was a Jewish fellow who revolted against the Romans in the year 132. And Bar Kokhba would kill those people who would not be willing to fight on behalf of him against the Romans. And people who followed Jesus, and Jesus said, of course, turn the other cheek, resist not evil, things like that, they were not willing to fight, die, and kill. So Bar Kokhba persecuted them. So after about 150 years, Christianity was Christianity. It was no longer a form of Judaism. And it's at that point that the New Testament, so to speak, was accepted into the official canon of books of the Bible. And it was at that point that certain groups of Christians, until this day, accept various other books that were written by Jews even before Jesus, that don't relate to Jesus, that are not part of the official Jewish Bible, because Jews have been reading and writing for a very, very, very long time. But not everything that Jews have written and read has been part of the Bible. The Bible itself, the undisputed part of the Bible, is just 24 books. That's it. A sum total of 24 books, what Christians will call the Old Testament, and what Jews call Tanakh. You've heard the term Tanakh? Yeah?
Yeah.
Do you know what it stands for? It refers to the three parts of the Bible.
I think I've only heard the word. I think I've only heard that word from maybe you and maybe like one other person. So I'm not like super familiar.
Tanakh is just an acronym for three different Hebrew words: Torah, Nevi'im, Ksuvim. Now in Hebrew, the Kaf and the Chaf are the same letter with or without a dot. So Ksuvim could be turned into Ch. K could turn into Ch. It's considered the same letter. So Tanakh stands for Torah, Nevi'im, Ksuvim. You've heard the word Torah before, right? Now, most people don't know what it means. What it literally means is instructions. So, for example, you can buy books in Israel called Torat Bishul, the instructions for cooking. Torah just means instructions. So, the 5 books of Moses are called Torat Moshe, the instructions of Moses. Then Nevi'im literally means prophets. And the third is called the writings. And these are in degrading orders of importance and sanctity. So, Torah is sacrosanct above everything else. Nevi'im, prophets, is secondary, and Ksuvim, the collected writings, is third. So, for example, according to Jewish law, you're not supposed to put a book of Ksuvim on top of a book of Torah, because the Torah is holier. So, the Torah itself. So, Steve, I asked you before, I don't think it's in this recording, but I asked you before about the Bible, and you mentioned given over to Moses. That is what the Torah is. The Torah, the 5 books of Moses. It's also called the Pentateuch. So the Torah is literally just 5 books. Can you name any of them in either English or Hebrew?
Numbers.
Good.
I should be able to know, but it's kind of late
So
here.
there's like Genesis,
Yeah.
Deuteronomy,
Good.
Numbers, and
Well,
I think that's all I got.
I think you have them all probably. Just out of head remembering. But Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus,
Exodus.
Numbers, Deuteronomy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right? And in English, you've probably heard, not in English, in Hebrew, you've probably heard, and the problem with Hebrew is that there's so many different accents. But just like in English, I'm not going to give you the Spanish accents and the various other accents for the names of the Bible. So in Hebrew, I'm just going to go with the one that you're most likely to hear in America. For example, if you go to Chabad, that's the Ashkenazi accent, the European Jewish accent, and even among European Jews, there's various accents, but just most commonly average Bereshis. You've heard the word Bereshis? Bereshis.
Yeah.
That's Genesis, right? Genesis means the beginning. The second book is Shemos, which literally means names, because among Jews, the Bible books are just named after the first word in each of the books. The first word that's not like a very common word, right? The first unique word in each book. So the second book is Shemos, which means the names, because the book begins with saying, these are the names of the sons of Jacob who went down to Egypt. And that's Exodus. Exodus in English means the Exodus. You know what it means, right? The Jews leaving Egypt. The third book is Vayikra. Literally means, and he called, right? That's it. And he called, because that's the first unique word in that book. But in English, we refer to it as Leviticus. Leviticus means relating to the Levites, right? For example, you're related to some Cohens, right? You descend from some people who were Kohanim. So they belong to the tribe of Levi. So the book of Leviticus, the third book in the Pentateuch, the 5 books of Moses, the third book deals largely with the specific things that Levites are supposed to do. Not entirely, but specific things that were the jobs of the Levites in the temple, various holy matters. The 4th book in Hebrew is called Bamidbar. And like you said, the first one you got was Numbers, right? Numbers because there's accounting at some point. But Bamidbar, which literally means in the desert, just because, again, that's the first unique word that appears in that book. And the final book is Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy literally means a second teaching, a second law, a review of the law. And in Hebrew, literally Dvarim. Dvarim just means things or words. Again, for the Hebrew perspective, it's not trying to give you a title for the entire book. It's just giving you the very first unique word. So Bereshis, Shmos, Vayikra, Bamidbar, Dvarim. Bereshis is Genesis. Shmos is Exodus. Vayikra is Leviticus. Numbers is Bamidbar. And Dvarim is Deuteronomy. Now, Bereshis starts out. Do you remember how Bereshis begins? Where in history does Genesis begin? The Bible begin?
Yeah, that's good.
I think it begins with the Garden of Eden.
No, it's got to be like God created the heavens and the earth.
Yeah, okay, that part first. Yeah, okay.
One chapter before the Garden of Eden, right? Yeah. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Yeah. So that's where Genesis begins, with the very, very, very Genesis, the very beginning of everything. And that runs from the beginning, and then the beginning. What's the very first thing? The very first thing God creates is light. The very beginning of Genesis says God made light, and He saw it was good. Then there's 6 subsequent days of creation, where God makes light on the first day. And again, these are epochs. In other words, the beginning of Genesis is definitively not trying to give you a scientific accounting. It's an epoch, 6 different epochs until eventually the sixth one is where animals and man come into being, and the 7th one is the Sabbath. The idea, which is absolutely fundamental to life, it's just so necessary. I pity anybody who doesn't have the concept of the Sabbath in their life. And then it goes on to Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. And it continues for 20 generations. It lists 20 generations from Adam until Abraham. Adam, Shes, Enosh, Canaan, Mahalalel, Yered, Chanoch, Mesushelach, Lemech, then Noach. Noach is the famous one, 10 generations later. Noah with the flood. Shem, Arpachshad, Shalach, Ever, Peleg, Re'u, Serug, Nochar, Terach, Avraham. Avraham is Abraham, right? Like your brother's name. And Abraham is somebody who, according to the Bible, God chose as to be the person who was His chosen person and His representative on earth, the person who understood God the best, God's favorite guy. And Abraham had a couple of children, one of whom was Isaac. Isaac had 2 sons, one of whom was Jacob. And then Jacob was ratified as the father of the people of God when his name was changed to Israel. Israel means approximately wrestles with God, wrestles with powers and wins. He's able to take on the world from its various perspectives. And then all of Jacob's children, all of Jacob's sons anyway, are the 12 tribes, and they are all Jews, and the Jews today descend genetically and mimetically. Memes are an important concept. Mimetically, or memes, refers to ideas. So in other words, for example, I or you could have converted to Judaism.
You say memes. Are we talking about, describe what you mean by that? Because memes today might be something different.
Yeah, that is true. It's very ironic in a terrible way that the incredibly important concept of memes created by Richard Dawkins, who made up the word meme, has turned into this childish, just a picture with words attached to it. A meme is an idea that travels through human society and prevails. So, for example, if I have a religion, or if I have a way of wearing shoes, and you have a religion or a way of wearing shoes, or a language, or an expression, or a way that you laugh, and one of ours becomes more popular, then our meme won. The same way like genes. Like if you and I are living in an environment, and in order to get food, you have to get really tall to get the food off the tree. And I'm able to get the food because I'm taller. You're not able to because you're not as tall. So I get all the food. I live longer. I get all the women. You don't because you can't give them food. And therefore, the next generation is going to be more like me than like you, because they have my genes, my tall genes, whereas you, unfortunately, didn't pass on your short genes because you couldn't reach the food, right? So memes are, when it comes to ideas, memes is a very, very important idea, which points out that we're not only competing genetically, like which of our genes better fits the environment, so that, because they didn't used to have birth control and whatever else, so back then, well, every guy would like to fuck as much as he wants, as much as he can, and essentially the only thing holding you back is who's going to get access to the food, the health, the women, the longevity, and all the stuff. Whoever's better suited for that environment is the one who has more access to it, and therefore the next generation carries their genes. So memes is the idea that I could have no children, and you could have 50 children from 10 wives, and yet, if I have a better idea or better religion or better language or something else that's an idea different than what you have that works, it's more popular with people in a certain environment, then my meme is the one that survives and your meme does not. And the truth is that humanity for the last, well, at least a few thousand years, for all of recorded history, has been more shaped, has been evolving more based on memes than based on genes. Which is why, for example, in the West today, you see there are many, many people who are incredibly, incredibly wealthy and educated, and they have between 0 and 2 children. And yet, we can be sure that in 30 years, the Africans and Afghanis who come to America or to Europe, the majority of them will end up holding a great deal of the memes of these people who themselves didn't even have any kids, because those are winning memes. It doesn't mean they're good morally, but it means they work. If you know how to make money and everybody wants to make money, then people are going to speak your language and they're going to follow your culture. So a meme is literally just a distinct piece of the culture. And that's what's really been moving civilization forth. And that's why when it comes to Jews, for example, so we are all Jewish. But yet we definitely don't look, color-wise, the way that Jews looked thousands of years ago, because a large part of our ancestry is from people who were not descended from those Jews. Some of it is from those people who were descended from Jews who lived in Israel thousands of years ago. But a large part is not, but we inherited the memes. In other words, the people who converted to Judaism, they took on the Jewish cultural aspects, the various memes of Judaism, and they passed it on. So there's no such thing as a pure Jewish race. Never existed. I mean, Moses, for example, at one point in the Bible, Moses' sister gets upset at him because he's married to a non-Jewish woman, a Cushite woman. So, I mean, Solomon had many wives all over the place. You have the whole book in the Bible called Ruth, about how King David, his great-great-grandmother, was actually a Moabite woman who was specifically, in the 5 books of Moses, it says that Moabite women are not allowed to marry into the Jews. But nonetheless, there was a way around it. And so therefore, we descend today from all kinds of people, including from the original stock of Jews. Genetically, we're pretty sure of that. But what we have is definitively is the memes that have been passed on. Okay, so the first book of the Pentateuch, and again, so we're dividing it by Torah, Nevi'im, Ksuvim. Torah meaning the instructions, Nevi'im meaning the prophets, Ksuvim meaning the collected writings. Now for the Jews, and again, this is what's anybody who holds to the idea of the Bible all agree that these 24 books are biblical. Everything beyond that is disputed. Now, these 24 books were completed. In other words, there was nothing added to them, with the possibility of someone throwing in a word or a word creeping in somewhere accidentally over the course of things being written and transcribed over the course of many generations. But essentially, they were completely closed 2,200 years ago at the latest. In other words, they are at least, all of them, at least 2,200 years old. Whereas for Christians who are non-Ethiopic or otherwise small groups, but Christians who are part of the major denominations, their books closed at the latest approximately 1,800 years ago. So the Jewish Bible predates it by at least 400 years, the very last of the books. And that one of the very last of the books is actually disputed itself, but we'll get there. So Torah is the first section. Torah is by far the most important. So for example, when you go to synagogue, when you go to shul, and they read from the Torah, right, they read the Parsha, what they're reading is literally from the 5 books of Moses. The 5 books of Moses are divided into 54 parts, and every week we read a section of it in the synagogue. So that is sacrosanct, above and beyond everything else, not even close. Those are the 5 books of Moses. In fact, matter of fact, there is a group in Israel called the Samaritans. Have you ever heard of the Samaritans, or the term Samaritan?
Yeah.
So Samaritans, they're a little bit famous in the world today because of Jesus spoke about something, the Good Samaritan, which is a whole separate point in the New Testament. But the Samaritans are a real group of people that existed way, way, way back when, since biblical times, that continue today. I visited them actually in Nablus, in Shechem.
Even for somebody who's been reading, and going to shul for a few times in their life, the words are they're overwhelming. The words, they're just blah, blah, blah. They don't mean anything because the words are so, all the different names and things and places, they're they're so weird. They're for me, they're almost they're so weird they almost can't even be remembered. The second you hear these things, for me, I just have to strike it from my brain because they're so weird and so confusing that I can't get a grasp of anything if I have to try to get a grasp of all the weird words and the weird names, and it's just eye glazing, and it makes the understanding of the generalities of the story that you're trying to put forth for someone like me, just like it just doesn't work.
All right, so very, very simply, the Tanakh, the Jewish Bible, is 3 sections. And all the people in the world agree that the Tanakh is part of the Bible, right? 3 sections,
right.
Torah, prophets, writings.
Okay.
We got that? Torah, the prophets, and the writings.
So what is the Haftorah?
The Haftorah is a small section from either the prophets or the writings. It seems that at one point, Jews were forbidden from reading the Torah itself, and therefore they would read, or at least this is how the legend goes, they would read from they would do the Haftorah. They would read a section from the prophets or writings instead that relates to that Torah portion. So, so the Haftorah is just from the prophets' writings. That's it. So everything in the Jewish Bible is either Torah, prophets, or writings. Okay, so the Torah is 5 books, right? We'll do it in the English: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Here's where we have a bit of a controversial matter because lots and lots of people, Jews, Christians, etc., believe that it's literally given by God to Moses letter for letter, but that is an incredibly disrespectful point of view on the Bible, because the Bible itself never says anything like that. God and Moses are both characters in the Bible. They're both characters in the Bible. In fact, the book of Deuteronomy ends with the death of Moses. It says Moses died, God buried him, the Jews mourned him for 30 days, and since then, nobody has arisen like Moses. It talks about Moses. So there have been many, many people, Jews and Christians, who have tried to claim that Moses wrote that before he died, which would be essentially writing a lie, and Moses died and the Jews mourned him and no one ever arose after him like that. So the Bible itself never makes that claim. The Bible has no stated author. The narrator doesn't name himself. But the Bible does quote God oftentimes. So that's where the idea came into play. The Bible has to do with Moses and God quite a bit. So when people would say it was written by God and they were quoting something that was said by God or by Moses, later on, over the course of the game of telephone over thousands of years, people lost track of what they had heard and they thought that meant the entire thing word for word was written by God or by Moses. But it never makes that claim. So the Bible, as you said, it starts off with, in the beginning, God created heaven and earth. So human recorded history goes back about 6,000 years. That's as far back as we have human records. Before that, we just have archaeology. It appears that there was a group of priests, whatever that means in their context, but a group of priests in ancient Sumeria, which is the only civilization, the only recorded civilization that survived until this day, through us, through the Jews, through the Bible. And these people were keeping track of things like, in the beginning, God created earth, and the story of Garden of Eden with its incredible, incredible messages in it. It's not a silly story at all. It's a very important story. It most likely details the creation of agriculture and how when you start to think and plan and strategize, if you eat from the tree of knowledge, well, you're never going to have the tree of life. They're 2 different things. You can live or you can try to play the rules. And it was a lesson for all of mankind. For us as individuals, we're kind of stuck within the game that we're in, but it was a lesson for all of mankind. But that's a separate point. We can't get into the Garden of Eden story right now. It would take forever. So the first book, the book of Genesis, beginning of heaven and earth, and it goes up until the death of Joseph, and up until approximately the death of Joseph, who was the son of Jacob. It never mentions Moses. The book of Genesis is the only one of the 5 books of Moses, never mentions Moses. Now, after the book of Genesis, you have Exodus. This is where Moses shows up very early on. Moses is born. We have a record of his birth. We have a record of him being raised in the Pharaoh's palace. We know where his name comes from, Moshe, which almost everybody gets wrong, by the way. The name Moshe literally just means the son of. It's a royal name, and people would use it for royalty, meaning the son of some god. For example, the son of Ra, the son of Ramses, the son of Ra. Tutmos, the son of Tut, Anchmos, Akmos, etc., the son of these various gods. And what Pharaoh's daughter, who took him out of the water, was saying is that from the water I made him Moses. Yes, I didn't create him myself in my own womb, but he became my son, my royal son from the water. From this water I Mosesed him. In any case, so Exodus and then Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy detail the subsequent period of Moses' life up through his death, which incorporates the leaving of Egypt, the revelation at Sinai, all the travails in the desert, etc. So those are the 5 books of Moses. Bereshis, Shmos, Vayikra, Bamidbar, Dvarim. Any questions on Torah? This is Torah.
Nope.
Can you name me the 5 books in either English or Hebrew? Try them in English first.
Yeah. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy.
Excellent. How about Hebrew?
Oh shit.
I'm gonna have to take that part out. I think maybe not. We'll see.
What you said? Fuck earlier.
Did I? I'll probably take that out.
You're gonna censor me?
Huh?
You're an asshole. You're gonna censor me?
I'll just put like an X over your face.
Yeah,
or just
whatever.
Or satanic horns.
Yeah. Are we taking a stab at this? The Hebrew?
Can you name any of the Hebrew books? I'll say them again. Then try again. Bereshis. Say after me. Bereshis.
Well, okay, no, you know what? You know what really screws with me, dude. Honestly, is that so the when I was growing up, when I was taught Hebrew, they were Chabad, right? Like Chabad Jews, and they what are the 2 different like types of Jews? There's like the Ashkenazi Jews and the
Sephardic.
Yeah, the Sephardic, right? The Chabadniks, they're like Ashkenazi, right?
Mostly.
But like when you say like the suf instead of the tuf on words, is that Ashkenazi or Sephardic?
Ashkenaz.
When you say the suf.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's how I learned initially, but I was super young. When I went to like Jewish school, like when I was in like elementary and middle school, we learned Hebrew, and everything sounded like with a tuf on the end instead.
The reason for that is because in Israel, they pronounce it with a tuf at the end. So,
yeah,
you know, being as Israel is an important thing to most American Jews, that they teach them that way. Bereshit, Shemot, Vayikra, Bamidbar, Dvarim. So say after me. May as well say it. Bereshit.
Bereshit.
Shemot.
Shemot.
Vayikra.
Vayikra.
Bamidbar.
Bamidbar. And Dvarim.
Yeah. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. So like I said, Genesis stretches back to before the word Jews at all. Then the rest of them detail the time period of Moses. The first chapter in Exodus starts off with detailing the Jews in Egypt, how they totally sucked, and then Moses is born, and he has a whole life story, and talks to God, and God talks to the Jews, etc., etc. And the Torah ends off amazingly outside the land of Israel. The entire Torah ends off before Moses never got into the land of Israel. It ends before the Jews crossed over out of Egypt into Israel. Mm-hmm. So that is the first 5 books of Moses. As to exactly when they were written by whom, well, you know, different people give you different answers, but one thing that is definitively certain is that the Torah itself very clearly, essentially states that it is not written by either God or Moses. If it did, it would be spoken in the first person. God would be saying, in the beginning, I created heaven and earth. It doesn't say anything like that. It doesn't say, I said to Moses, nor, from Moses' perspective, does it say, God said to me. Those are characters within the Bible. And oftentimes in the 5 books, you'll find things that were definitively put in later on that are not tricks. In other words, none of this is supposed to be to trick to you. It says, like, for example, the book of Deuteronomy, Dvarim, it begins saying, these are the words that God spoke to Moses. Why are you smirking?
Because Yale's being crazy, dude.
What?
Yale's being nuts.
All right, so that's the Torah. Now, the Torah finishes off 3,460 years ago. That's when it ends. Right? Like I said, later, like the beginning of the book of Deuteronomy says, these are the words that Moses spoke on the other side of the Jordan. In other words, it's written by somebody in the land of Israel saying, this is what Moses said on the other side of the Jordan. So that was definitively written later on. Unless you want to believe something religious based on faith, but that's not what the Bible says, and it's disrespectful to the Bible itself when it clearly is saying otherwise. But what it details is everything that happened on the other side of the Jordan. Everything that happened up to 3,460 years ago, according to my account. Then you have the prophets. The prophets go on from about 3,460 years ago up until around 2,500 years ago. The prophets close, the last things they discuss are about 2,500 years ago. So these are the books of the prophets. So the prophets are divided into two sections, right? So we discussed the Torah, now we're talking the prophets, third is the writings. The prophets are in two sections. The first is narrative, telling the story. And the second is a bunch of books of prophetic speeches, things that the prophets wrote and spoke and did. So the first section has 4 books in it, and those are Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings. The first section of prophets has those 4 books: Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings. Joshua is a person who took over from Moses. It talks about Joshua's life. Judges is a whole bunch of small stories, including the story of Samson. You familiar with the story of Samson?
Yeah.
Samson was a Nazir, all different kinds of rules applying to him. And in exchange, he would be incredibly strong, physically mighty, and would save the Jews by whacking at the Philistines. So that's one really interesting story, but there's a bunch of little interesting stories inside the book of Judges. And then
I
you
thought
have...
it was the guy who invented the luggage.
What? Samsonites? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's probably named after him, I assume, though. I'm saying, because they're probably trying to claim it's strong luggage. It might be after Samson, I don't know. Anyway, so Joshua is just one guy, the life of Joshua, a guy who took over from Moses. Judges relates to these various small stuff. And then Samuel relates to the life of Samuel, who was one fellow. And it's actually often in our books today broken up into Samuel 1 and 2. Similarly, Kings are broken up into 1 and 2 because they're very long books. But Samuel is the person who anoints the first king of the Jews, whose name was Saul. He also anointed the second king of the Jews, whose name was... He's very famous.
King David.
Yes, exactly, King David. And then the book of Kings details the rest of the history of kings, including the most famous one is actually Hezekiah, and we have literally his marker. They discovered archaeologically in an area, my friend lives like right there. I lived in that area for 7 years. They discovered only a few years ago the royal stamp of Hezekiah, which is extraordinary.
Where is it? Where is it?
Presumably in a museum.
Okay.
I mean, they found it in Israel. The Mormon point of view about the Jews moving to America was not correct. They didn't find it here. Even though at Brigham Young University, they continued to do research about ancient Jews in America, which has got to be embarrassing for the people who have to do that research because it's just complete nonsense and everyone knows it's nonsense. So the prophets divided in 2 parts. The first is narrative, Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings. Or in Hebrew, Joshua, Yehoshua, Judges, Shoftim, that's the word, Shoftim. Samuel, how do you say Samuel in Hebrew?
Shmuel? I don't know.
Exactly. Shmuel, exactly right. And Kings, the word is Melachim. Melachim is the word for kings. The second half of the prophets are books by various prophets. So those are 4 books. They are Isaiah, who's in Hebrew Yeshaya. The second one is Jeremiah, in Hebrew Yirmiah. The third is Ezekiel, Yechezkel. And the fourth is Trei Asar, which literally just means 12. Yeshaya, Isaiah, he lived approximately 2,750 years ago. About, can you turn your thing?
And that's your phone.
Oh, did your thing go off? Are you gone? I guess they're gone. Apparently the last thing that a phone sees before it goes completely dead is everything going sideways. This is the first video that I've done with somebody that I'm posting onto YouTube, and it's pretty cool. I think what was utilized was Google Meet, although I'm not sure. It's just on my Samsung phone. You can push the video camera picture instead of the phone, and I think that's what it was. I wish there was a way for me to make it side-by-side screens. For example, this was more of me teaching. But if I want to interview somebody, if I want to have a conversation with someone or with multiple people, it would be great if I could have a completely, split screen down the middle. Not sure what exactly does that. In any case, their battery went out halfway through Tanakh. But before well, you know what? I'm not going to finish it on this video. Instead, I'll take to heart what Steve and his son Nick, who I thank very, very much, because this video worked out really, really well. I was suffering quite horribly trying to give over an introduction to the Bible on video on my own as a monologue, and it was just impossible to figure out how to like satisfy all the different potential possible people who might watch it, because as of right now, I don't have any regular demographic stable audience. So this was really helpful. And Steve and Nick, thank you very much. I really, really appreciate it. They mentioned earlier, before we started the video, that I should mention here two things. First of all, I should ask you to give me money. I'm terrible at that, but if you want to, please feel free. At the moment, I have Venmo and Cash App and Zelle and PayPal, and on all of them, I assume that the correct address would be moshejrudner@gmail.com. This channel is YDYDY, but the official powers that be decide that you should have one name and stick to it for a while. So there it is, moshejrudner@gmail, moshejrudner@gmail.com. I'm not really begging for cash. I'm just like following through on, I guess you got to do it. Oh yeah, I guess I should be asking for likes and subscribes and shares and stuff. What was the other thing they said though? Yeah, also, if there's somebody that you want me to interview, then go ahead and arrange it. If there's somebody who's famous especially, that's what they said. Because apparently, well, the thing is, I am totally incapable of strategizing and engaging in tactics to try to make anything happen. All I've got is sincerity. All I've got is genuineness. I can't do anything else. People used to think I would be good at sales because I'm good at speaking. I don't know if I'm good in these videos, but I've lectured internationally and have had a radio show, yada, yada. Rabbi of a synagogue, a lot of things. But sales is telling someone something that is not necessarily in their benefit, not necessarily what you would say unless you were getting paid for it. I have attempted sales. I can't do it. I don't know how to do it. Here too with YouTube. I do not know how to get followers. It has to be up to other people to do that. And apparently getting famous people helps. So if you got someone famous and you think I could interview them and it'd be interesting, then please set it up. But really, more importantly, just to cut to the chase, if you are able to spread or share or whatever it's called, then you got to know I can't do it. If you want to understand why I can't do it, because you probably can't comprehend, why can't he do it? He seems capable at lots of things. Why can't he just figure out blah, 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 simple YouTube, whatever stuff? There's a video on this channel which is as personal as Augustine's Confessions, I would think, if not more. It's called Naked. That's what I named it after I gave that talk. Naked. In parentheses, ADHD, Autism, and Auschwitz. And that might give you some inkling of what perhaps you can't really understand, but is definitely true, which is that all that I have is who I am in the moment. All that I have is my true sincerity. How to actually make it happen, even though any child can figure out how to actually not alienate the algorithm as I regularly do, not alienate all the gatekeepers as I regularly do. Whatever. All I can do is give my talk. All I can do is speak what's in the heart. The rest, if anybody else wants to make it happen, it's up to you. I leave it in your hands, the hands of fate, hands of the Lord. As for the rest of the Torah, because we still have the second half of the prophets to go through, and all of the writings, which are this incredible collection of books, all of them different from the other, from poetry to, wise sayings, to the story of Job, which you probably heard of, to all different kinds of things. It's really, really incredible stuff. I guess that will have to wait. It really comes down to, at this point, if I have a demographic, if I have people that I'm actually reaching, then I can do it. If I know that this is something you're interested in, you got to let me know. You got to share this. Comment, like, subscribe, etc. But really, beyond your own interest, I'm really only going to do this performance if I know that it'll get anywhere. Forget about money or whatever else. Forget about any kind of benefit to myself. It's impossible to actually do a performance in the closet. You got to know you're being heard. You got to know you're being appreciated. So, yeah, that's just the realities. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed. And just to review, the Bible, the original, is 24 books, divided into the Torah, Nevi'im, Ketuvim, the instructions, which are the 5 books of Moses, and the prophets, which are 8 books. The first 4 are narrative, the next 4 are literary, and then Ketuvim, which are a whole medley of books, 11 different books. If you want to know the names right offhand, Tehillim, Mishlei, Iyov, Shir Hashirim, Rus, Echa, Koheles, Esther, Daniel, Ezra, Nehemiah, Divrei Hayomim. If you want to know the English versions and details about them, well, I'll be happy to, if I know that there's a bunch of people who are interested. Anyways, be blessed. Thank you.